Welcome to my One Piece chapter analysis video. This is your one and only host Jazzer, and I'll be your host for chapter 991. Please let us die. The chapter starts with Drake standing over the body of the number that he defeated last chapter. It's interesting that this specific number, more than any other number, heavily resembles a dragon more than a human. This is just a conjecture, but the numbers may be ordered in succession to the trial number. Meaning, number 1 was the first failure that Caesar or Vegapunk made, while number 10 is the 10th failure. If so, what would logically follow is that number 10, although a failure, was the closest to success in the experiments out of the other numbers, and since we have seen a giant dragon in Punk Hazard that looks almost identical to the 10th number's head, Vegapunk or Caesar may have been creating artificial dragons on the same people they were using the gigantification process on. So the dragons we saw on Punk Hazard may have originally been human. Food for thought. Everyone questions Drake on his actions, and we get a small flashback of a conversation between him and Koby. He mentions that Luffy has the power to attract people, and this, of course, is a parallel to what Mihawk said in Marineford. In Mihawk's own words, it's not a devil fruit ability or some trick. One by one, he turns the people around him into allies. More than anyone else sailing the seas, that man possesses the most terrifying power. What Koby said here matches Mihawk's observation even in the phrasing. And while some people may think it's related to his straw hat or a special bond of destiny or some other bullshit, Mihawk already confirmed that it isn't. It's clear from their choice of words and Koby's explanation that it's a matter of character and personality, nothing more, nothing less. Luffy questions Drake about his motives, but Drake dodges the question by saying he cannot disclose that information, but at the very least, they currently have the same objective. This was enough for Luffy, but Zoro interestingly interjected his proposal. This is great that Oda did this because it's extremely consistent with Zoro's character, in which he's usually the one to hold back on Luffy's spontaneous decisions, even if they turn to be true in the end. The most popular examples of this are when Zoro stops Luffy from accepting back Usopp into the crew in Water 7. In Zoro's own words from Water 7, "Listen, I don't mind if you're easygoing most of the time, but you can't let people walk all over you, because if you do that, it'll be me who leaves the crew next." Zoro was always the most firm with Luffy. Recall the scene in Punk Hazard Laboratory as well, and also the discussion on Zou before leaving to Big Mom for Sanji. Zoro is a realist, while Luffy is an idealist. And this contrast was perfectly showcased in this scene. A fascinating duo to say the least. Jinbe also joins in and says something that made me think back to Dressrosa with Bellamy. This might lead to a tangent, but please hear me out. In chapter 769, after Doflamingo set Bellamy free, Bellamy continues to fight Luffy and explains to him that he understands he chose the wrong man to follow, and it's pitiful, but what would be even more pathetic is to lash out at that man just because his answer wasn't the one he wanted to hear. Bellamy was an idiot, as he realizes himself, but at least he was man enough to stick to his faulty decision and suffer its consequences through to the very end. Truly admirable in his own way, and this made me appreciate Bellamy a lot more. Drake of course was never loyal to Kaido in the first place, but because the Straw Hats don't know that, to them it seems like Drake switched sides on a whim because he was rejected, and so he joined Luffy, which Jinbe acknowledges in the world of pirates would be seen as a move of an untrustworthy coward. For better or worse, Luffy insists that it's okay. You could argue it's Luffy being gullible, or it could be Luffy's observation Haki to see through one's nature. It was the same when Law allied himself with Luffy in Punk Hazard and agreed immediately, because he could tell Law didn't have bad intentions at the very least. This was also confirmed as being observation Haki in chapter 894 when Rayleigh told Luffy that he's proficient at reading the feelings of other living things, despite Luffy being unaware of it. This is potentially also related to the voice of all things. During this confrontation with Drake, our favorite Dino siblings return to battle. Sanji, as expected, spots Ulti and is already fond of her, while Usopp attacks Page 1. In what is my personal funniest moment in Wano, Usopp taunts Ulti from behind Nami, pretending to be her, and successfully incites Ulti and Page 1 to chase them both. It might be too early, but I believe this to be the start of Usopp and Nami's big fights in Onigashima because the two pairs have quite a few similarities. Now you might say that Ulti and Page 1 are too strong for Usopp and Nami. While the concern is justified, we still cannot gauge Nami's current strength since she got 2 consecutive upgrades to her claim attack. Zeus included. Of course he's not with her now, but that might change later. We also haven't seen Usopp fight since Dressrosa and have not had progress updates on his observation Haki. The point I'm trying to make is that we don't know Usopp and Nami's maximum potential at their current stage. Another reason why this is very possible is that Usopp and Nami are the crew's weakest duo. This is already known and established long ago, even by things like their bounties being the lowest in the crew when they all got their bounties. Obviously Usopp has more now, but that is because of the god Usopp misunderstanding in Dressrosa. And while it isn't confirmed yet, most people would rank Page 1 and Ulti at the bottom part of the Flying Six in terms of strength. Sasaki and Who's Who were pointed out to be the ones at the forefront, with Drake being generally scaled as either weaker than those two or possibly even stronger. The only outlier is Black Maria, but we have no idea where she stands. Power scaling aside, there are many similarities between the Usopp/Nami duo and the Ulti/Page 1 duo, with one of them revolving around Usopp and Nami's dynamic being extremely reminiscent to that of a brother and sister at this point in the story. Even scandalous acts like Nami comfortably shoving Usopp into her breasts at Saba Odi wasn't taken too seriously by the community because we know they don't have that sort of relationship. Another clear comparison between the duos is that obviously one is a girl, and the other is a boy. Oda loves his same-gender one-on-one big fights for Nami, and so Ulti is a perfect candidate for her, while Usopp takes care of Page 1. It's also worth noting that Page 1 and Ulti have by far the highest potential for comedy out of all the Flying Six, and comedy has been, without exception, a staple in both Usopp and Nami's fights throughout the story. Oda will probably have a lot of fun writing these fights if he decides to go that route. Luffy and Sanji then continue forward, and Sanji makes a very interesting remark that they have to get to Kinemon, Sanji included. This specific comment is important because it parallels, or potentially even negates Zoro's comment from 2 chapters ago where he also said he would go up with Luffy. Most would overlook this, but once both Zoro and Sanji have the same goal, usually either both happen, or neither. Meaning that it is likely now that if Zoro goes up to Kaido, then Sanji will be there as well, or alternatively, both end up not making it, and end up fighting their own respective fights. For example, against Queen and King. They then get intercepted by Apoo. But Luffy uses what seems to be future sight Haki and tells Sanji in advance to cover his ears. We see his bounty again, but this was already shown 300 chapters ago. Apoo in this scene seems to do something which can be taken in 2 ways. He's either the leader of the numbers, the one commanding them, or he was actually singing and buffing the numbers with his fighting music, as indicated by the music signs in his dialogue. He tries to get the other numbers but is stopped by a combined attack of Zoro and Drake. So, despite the distrust between them, it seems Drake will probably have to earn his spot in being an ally, and not just be accepted immediately. Frankie also has to rush out of the skull because Hacha, the 8th number, thinks Frankie's Shogun is a toy, and starts chasing after him, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. Queen is also shown firing a Gatling gun towards Drake, which seemed okay at first, but he then gets an ominous feeling here about the nature of the bullets Queen is using. While there are no visual hints, these bullets might be the mummy virus bullets that were shown back in Udon, which could be extremely bad for everyone there if it spreads. Enemies and allies alike. In the final scene of the chapter, we cut to Jack falling to the ground with his right tusk now broken and a probably permanent claw-mark scar on his left eye. In the worst case, he could lose his left eye. Many felt that Jack being defeated already portrayed him to be weak. I would argue that Jack actually displayed the most impressive endurance in Onigashima by single-handedly taking on an entire race in their most powered-up state and managing to defeat all but the 2 strongest, while still not dying himself. Zones in general are notorious for their stamina and endurance, and this means that many of the commanders in Onigashima will probably fall numerous times, but the key factor is that they will come right back up in no time. Kaido even tells Jack to rest for a bit, clearly hinting Jack will soon return to battle. Kaido in this was unexpectedly gracious and sympathetic towards Jack, which adds a layer to Kaido's personality and his attitude towards his underlings. He might be a nicer guy than we initially thought. In a way, it also builds on Kaido's relationship with his right-hand man Jack. Jack, despite being the weakest calamity, seems to be the hardest working one and respects Kaido the most. If you think about it more, Jack has been with the Beast Pirates since he was a small child. So Kaido might see him as his very own son, unlike Yamato, and Jack sees Kaido as his own dad. In the same scene, we finally get to see Nekomamashi and Inu Arashi so long for the first time, and man do they look menacing. Inu Arashi especially changed the most and now resembles a fox or wolf more than the dog he was, which is fitting because of the Su Long being inspired by werewolves. Neko looks like a more vicious Cheshire cat from Alice in Wonderland, further referenced by the panel when Nekomamashi mentions the full moon in complete darkness with only his eyes and smile visible. I personally prefer Carrot's transformation more, simply because for Carrots it was more of a surreal and majestic look, whereas the 2 dukes look more vicious and intimidating, which is admittedly fitting in this case because of the situation, so in their own way, they're great as well. We also get to see for the first time Kinemon cutting Kaido's Boro breath as many fans anticipated. This is important for a few reasons most people wouldn't remember. Kinemon is known as Foxfire Kinemon and his specialty was cutting fire. With this in mind, it was safe to assume that his epithet and ability was almost exclusively created for Kaido, since it has barely been utilized in the entire story up to this point. Now, let me take you back to chapter 128 at the end of Little Garden. As they were leaving, Zoro remarks that he needs to get stronger, so he can even cut steel. Now of course in hindsight this was subtle foreshadowing to his fight with Daw's Bones. The reason I brought that up is that in chapter 126, after using a fire technique, Zoro says fire swords aren't bad. In chapter 604, as a part of a gag, Zoro says that he always wanted a fire sword. Fast forward to chapter 672, Zoro is incredibly fascinated with Kinemon's fire cutting technique and made the remark of wanting to learn to cut fire. It's safe to say there is enough foreshadowing for him to do so. If a character says they wonder if they can do something outside of their abilities or hope to learn it one day, chances are, they will. A recent example is when Luffy wondered if he could see a glimpse into the future like Katakuri. Since Kinemon's fire-cutting ability was put to use on Kaido this chapter, it's safe to say that Zoro in the future will perform a similar feat, and either cut Kaido's breath or alternatively, use it to cut King the Wildfire's ability. I personally believe it to be the latter, simply because Zoro cutting Kaido's breath would be redundant since we already saw it with Kinemon, and King's epithet is the Wildfire, and would be fitting for it to be an obstacle that Zoro has to overcome in an isolated 1v1 similar to Daw's Bones, rather than in a group fight with Kaido. After his slash, Kinemon manages to slightly cut Kaido as well, in what appears to be a flying slash. While not surprising since he managed to cut Kaido already a few chapters ago, this was a solo feat that impressed the community at large. It seems Kinemon deserves more respect to be put on his name. The chapter finally ends with all the scabbards voicing their frustration from running away, and give the biggest possible death flag by shouting the chapter title, "Please let us die." This was overall a great chapter deserving no less than a 10 out of 10. Keep writing that heat, Oda. This was your host, Jazzer, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace and love to One Piece fans and One Piece fans only.